Hello, I don't know if anybody is listening to this as yet, but this is my first test after having been to Tasmania. So, VK3 Alpha Mike Lima, testing. I wonder if anybody's on. Damn. Hello, if anyone's watching out there. This is just a test following my return from Tasmania. I returned on Thursday, and I'm just getting back into this. Didn't have a chance to set this up for the Saturday night transmission, but hope to do it next Saturday night. So this is just to see if it's still all working. And if anybody cares to text me back in the text box on the right, I should be able to see you. I see there are two people watching. I don't know who they might be. Please do text. I don't know whether I've set text up right and whether I can actually receive text. I'll just type something in the bottom here. And I hope people can see that. Getting a lot of noise from DMR repeater on, what is it, 438 something or other. 439, 425. Don't know whether it'll lob onto that again. This is VK3 Alpha Mike Lima from Burwood East in Melbourne. Oh! Noisy bastard, 439, 425. It's a DMR repeater. An increasing number of people seem to be using these DMR digital audio, highly compressed streams on repeaters here in Melbourne. Why, I have no idea, because the audio out of them is poor and the cost of the transceivers is high. So I don't quite understand what's going on there. Well, could anybody text me just to tell me that they're hearing this? I think I'm getting audio through, but I'm not sure. It's been 2 weeks since I've tried this. But I see I have two people watching, so we must be doing something right. I've been to Hobart, as some of you may have realised. One of the things that you can do in Hobart are go to recycling shops, tip shops. And there I've picked up a number of historical radio magazines, including Radio News for April 1934. It's a fairly high-powered journal in the way that Wireless World was many years later, although occasionally you get simple articles like this one on how to build regenerative receivers with a single valve, like that, called the Scoutmaster receiver, and with suitable manipulation of the regeneration control, you can get quite good DX results on a receiver like that. Another magazine from that time is this copy of Radio News, which I think is, let me see the date here, May 1932, with details of television lens design. Now, this is lens design for mechanical television or mechanical scanners. That cuckoo noise you can hear in the background is that radio, which when it detects a signal in scan, it lobs on and then goes boop, boop, like that. What else have we got here? The Melbourne Radio Magazine, Listener In, for June 22nd, 1935, with a picture of Ben Williams, the distinguished Welsh tenor, Grand Opera tenor who was touring Australia. The Listener In was a Melbourne-based magazine. Started publication in May 1925, and it continued until I think the early 1980s, when it became known as TV Scene. And another Australian magazine from the Hobart recycling shops, Wireless Weekly, for Friday, June 14th, 1935. And this is a Sydney one. By that stage, 1935, it had become predominantly a program magazine. You'll be able to see the program for Wednesday, June 19th, 1935 for various Victorian stations there. 3DB, 3AW, 3KZ, 3UZ, 3BO Bendigo, 3BA Ballarat, 3TR Sale, 3CT, what is it? 3GL Geelong, and 3MA Mildura. So if 1935 ever comes around again, it'll be very useful. Is anybody in a position to type something up in the text boxes here and let me know who's watching? I see there are two people, I think two people watching at the moment. Though whether you stick around is another thing. This is just simply a test of the apparatus here to see that everything still works. And I haven't tested this since leaving for Hobart about 3 weeks ago. I'll just turn this down a bit and turn that audio down. And I can see a bit of pixelating, and it's not, the refresh rate's about 12 frames per second at the moment for some strange reason. Something is probably slowing us down in terms of internet rate here. Okay. Well, does anybody have any comment? This is VK3AML, just testing. I'll ask the question. Is my audio audible? There is some movement of the little thermometer on the audio. Let me see. That switches the audio on and off. What does this do? Share live stream to Facebook. Oh, I see. Okay. I haven't tried that. I'll just see if there's some means of me changing privacy to allow people to come in on the chat. I think I have to set that up before I go live. So, for those of you who are interested in radio, also another recent discovery. My mother, who was born in 1912, was a fan of radio back in the interwar period. And she was a fan of the radio announcer Norman McCants, who's that chap there with the microphone. And that photo was taken in 1926 when Norman was doing the commentary on the return of Alan Cobham in a solo flight from England in a seaplane. Covers the history of radio in Australia quite well. It's profusely illustrated. It surprises me that not more people have heard of this who are involved with radio history. By Janet Workmeister. with a foreword by Barry Jones. Anyway, this is a test only, and it'll be a brief one unless I can get some typed feedback on the text box here. If you care to type on the text box, I'd be very much appreciated. For whoever just dialed in, this is just a test to see that my video and audio equipment's still working after 3 weeks away. Oh, Matt, g'day. Yeah, good. It's when you first switch this stuff on, it's impossible to know whether anybody's hearing this. But the long and the short of it is that after I went down to Deal Island to do the first VK7, VK3 Tasmania to Victoria modulated light contact, my wife and I had a holiday 2.5 weeks in Tasmania, which concluded on Thursday. Like shouting into the void, exactly. Anyway, my wife and I had this 2.5 weeks in Tasmania. As you may have seen from my video clips, we had an aurora display. Looking south from Hobart, we could see bands of moving green light in the sky. It was quite spectacular. And I managed to get a record of the aurora by setting up my camera on a tripod and shooting 30-second exposures, each frame shooting 30 seconds of every minute. And then at the end of it, I threw together the 40 or so minutes worth, 40 exposures or thereabouts, into a video editor and dissolved from one to the next. And you can see the movement of the aurora from that. So how have you been, Matt? Anything to report? Oh, thanks for that, Matt. Yeah, I should point out that in the time exposures, the aurora looked more impressive than it did just visually, because visually it's very dim. And your eyes with very dim illumination don't tend to detect color very well. I could tell that it was green, but only just. But when you see it in the time exposures of a good sensitive camera, such as the one I was using on that night, with a good long exposure, like 30 seconds, the color comes out particularly, and it was a brilliant bluish green with tinges of yellow and occasional red. I only wish that I had shortwave equipment with me when I was down in Hobart, because it would have been very interesting shortwave radio conditions with the aurora displays going on. Quite often when you hear signals propagated long distances by the ionosphere when the aurora is going, it has a kind of a growl behind it. I believe it's caused by the ionosphere moving back and forth in level extremely quickly, and it's a Doppler effect. And hello, Royza. Yeah, I am back again. Having spent most of the last 3 weeks in Hobart, which has some of the best second-hand bookstores and tip shops of anywhere in Australia. And I bought quite a few historical magazines, 1920s, 30s radio magazines while I was in Hobart. As I said earlier, witnessed an aurora display. Took a tremendous number of photographs, which those of you who follow me on Facebook would have seen. I took some hundreds of photographs of all sorts of places. Apart from the aurora display, I visited quite a few historic sites. The Taroona Shot Tower, there is a tower about 150 feet high, stone tower, which has a spiral staircase inside made entirely of wood. It's been there since the 1870s, and many of the wooden steps have never been replaced. It amazes me from the point of view of occupational health and safety that the place hasn't been condemned. All you would need on a wooden spiral staircase like that to produce a towering inferno effect is one dropped cigarette butt. So I got to the top of that and very trepidously took some scan pan photographs. Radio-wise, I only had a portable Baofeng transceiver with me, and about 2/3 of the way through the trip, the charger for the Baofeng battery literally flamed out on my bedside table. So for the cheapness of the Baofeng, you unfortunately get a trade-off in build quality. And so my charger is no more. And until such time as that charger is replaced, I'll have no Baofeng to operate. But I did use it for a couple of Sunday morning transmissions from Bellerive. We were up high in Bellerive, and I managed to get into the callback for the VK7 news broadcast on the Sunday morning. First Sunday we were there. The second Sunday, I heard two stations go to a simplex frequency. I think it was 147.5 megs. So I followed them, and one was incredibly strong, VK7FB, chap named Mike Jenner. And it turns out that Mike was one of the last lighthouse keepers on an island that's like a plateau with cliffs all around, almost 1,000 feet high, off the south coast of Tasmania, called Tasman Island. It's off Cape Hoy, off the Tasman Peninsula, Port Arthur and all that. And Mike Jenner was one of the last lighthouse keepers there. I noticed that his signal was incredibly strong. He gave me his address, which was literally 4 doors around the corner from where I was staying. And then when I looked in among the trees, I could see his antenna. It would have been easier if I'd just shouted from the distance that we had. So I got invited for a cup of tea. It turns out that he's head of a group called Friends of Tasman Island. They're involved with maintaining the historic lighthouse buildings on Tasman Island. And the only way of getting there now is by helicopter. So it's quite a task to get a working bee there to maintain the buildings, but he does. Mike Jenner, VK7, I think he's VK7 Fox Bravo, I'm not quite sure. Have any of you, Matt or Royza, got anything new to tell me from this week? G'day, Van Dan. Hope I'm well. Yeah, very well. I've just been away in Tasmania at Hobart for the last 2.5, 3 weeks. So just back, and I'm testing the gear tonight as a preparation for my regular Sunday night transmission, 9:30 p.m. Melbourne time, which I'll be doing next Sunday on this medium, I think. So yeah, we've had a good time in Tassie. Apart from Mike Jenner, I'm just trying to think of anything else radio-wise. I spent 2 days with my old friend Mike Groth, Dr. Mike Groth, VK7MJ, and he was writing, when I was at his place, he was writing a, what do you call it, a PowerPoint presentation to be presented in May for the Radio and Electronics Association of Southern Tasmania on magnetic whistlers. They're a noise effect that you can pick up on very, very low frequencies and produced by electrons guided by the Earth's magnetic field, bouncing back and forth from pole to pole. So Mike's very good on the radio physics side of things. And although he's impeded in his movements by a illness that's akin to multiple sclerosis, he's now concentrating on lecturing and passing on his fund of knowledge. Had a family catch up at Hanging Rock today. Oh, a picnic at Hanging Rock. It's a wonder you ever came back. group of schoolgirls in 1900. You know the story. Living life, that's for sure. Yeah, so I can't think of anything else to pass on other than obviously the video gear is still working, the audio gear is still working. A bit of news. I'll be extending my Saturday night sessions where I play back spoken word material, historical material related to history of radio, history of technology, into HF radio as the year goes on. And I've always been put off the audio quality inherent in single sideband. I've always considered it too poor to be worthy of consideration for that sort of service. But just recently, a company partly based in America and partly based in India called that produces a software-defined transceiver called the ANAN, A-N-A-N, the ANAN 8000. And that transceiver, pardon me, I'll hit the mic button and have a good hack. Okay, hopefully that's cleared the throat. The ANAN 8000 is an entirely new type of sideband transceiver. Very stable frequency. You can vary the bandwidth of the audio transmitted through it from DC to whatever the software allows. And I believe on the ANAN, you can have it flat from 30 hertz to 5 kilohertz, which makes it roughly equivalent to an AM broadcast transmission. And I'd never heard sideband to compete with AM, good quality AM, until I heard an ANAN transceiver through an American web-based SDR. Was extremely impressed. So my wife and I have decided that with the inheritance that we recently got, which we're looking to put into not only investments, but for things that will give us considerable pleasure into the future, that we'll invest in an ANAN transceiver and extend the coverage of my Saturday night sessions through this on internet, as well as on VHF, UHF with that transceiver, and with the ANAN, probably on 80 meters, looking at 3670 as a center frequency for that. So if any of you are interstate, that is between, let's say, 60 kilometers and about 500 kilometers from Melbourne, that shortwave transmission on 80 meters, particularly with the single sideband, should cover that area no problem at all. I'll have to look at putting up a second mast so I can get a dipole antenna up, but that's a minor consideration. Do any of you have anything to report on the text box here that I can give you feedback on? Any questions or... I'm not going to act as a Lonely Hearts Club. I don't know any attractive young women to put you on to if you're into that sort of thing. I'm a little bit old for that. There are probably more suitable websites. But anything on technology or ham radio or picture transmission by shortwave, I might be able to help. Do we have any questions at all? I see we have 6 people watching, so that's one good step. Did I play around with OBS? Not yet, because as I say, I've been away 3 weeks in Tasmania, and the only computer gear I had down there was, number one, my wife's rather aging laptop, and I have a Lenovo ThinkPad, which is Microsoft based, but unfortunately the Lenovo connected itself to Wi-Fi in Hobart, tried to update its own operating system, and now won't boot. So my friend Tim, VK3FTZD, will be looking into that for me, because he knows a great deal more about operating systems and getting them straight than I do. Have I ever tried listening to VicPol? I presume you mean Victoria Police. In the 60s, yes. Victoria Police was on about 1690 kilohertz AM. They had a duplex system where the cars would talk back on VHF. The Fire Brigade also had a transmission around 1620 kilohertz. That also was in the 60s. I think the police went off the air, off AM, off broadcast, the end of the broadcast band in about 1964, and the Fire Brigade went off AM on 1690 kilohertz in around 1970. I would have been 16. What they had was the transmission on AM was one way. It was from D24 to the cars, and the cars would reply on VHF. I was recently at a ham fest where one of those duplex transceivers, which were made locally, incidentally, was offered for sale. And I think Dave Stewart, VK3ASE, got it. I know a number of people who listened to the police before it went encoded. I think the police transmissions are not encoded in the bush, where they haven't converted to digital encoding yet, but there's nothing, as far as I know, that you can receive of the police here. I can listen on UHF to ambulance services, and there's somewhere around 150 megs. I forget exactly where. One of the problems I have here is about only about 2 kilometers in that direction. I'm pointing, let me see, that's west, so that's southwest. Along the railway line between the Sindel and Mount Waverley stations, along the side of the railway line, there is a co-sited transmitter site which hosts the pager transmitters for the ambulance and the Country Fire Authority. When one pager goes off, no problem. When the other pager goes off, also no problem. But when both pages go off together out of that tower, they're both 500 watts on about 148.6 megs, I think. There are mixing products that appear all over 2 meters, growling noises at spot frequencies right across 2 meters, and it becomes very annoying. So I look forward to the day when pager transmitters are obsoleted completely. Aviation, on that radio there, I can pick up the aviation frequencies. Can't transmit on them, of course, locked out from that radio, but I can receive them. And for some strange reason, the aviation transmissions on VHF 130-something megahertz have stayed amplitude modulation. They've never gone to FM or sideband. I have no idea why, but that means that that radio is capable of receiving AM on VHF. And if I could hack it somehow, I might be able to get it to receive AM on 2 meters, though I can't quite see why I'd want to. Any other questions? Victoria Police. I've never been into scanning particularly, although I do have 2 desktop scanners here. I'll see if I can turn this around and give you a look. Those are 2 general coverage desktop scanners. The lowest frequency they cover is about 60 megahertz. the highest that they cover is 1 gig. And they can be made to scan those frequencies. So very handy for listening to 2 meters or 70 centimeters, my own transmissions on those bands. Those are monitor receivers, really, that I use to monitor my own transmissions. The top one came from a friend of mine named Mangan Ryan, who cast it off in my direction. The bottom one was bought at a Hamfest for the Yarra Valley Amateur Radio Club. Jim VK3AMN was selling that bottom scanner for $50 at a Hamfest about 5 years ago. So I grabbed that, and it's now my chief off-air monitor for my narrowband FM transmissions. Both of them have the Realistic brand, which is the rebranded name for stuff that was sold in days of yore by Tandy Electronics. I think both of them, the bottom one certainly was originally a Uniden job made by Uniden, but branded Realistic. The top one, I'm not sure. It may have been a Uniden unit originally, but I don't know that for sure. I'll just flip the camera around back on myself again. But something that I find it's damn near essential to have some means of monitoring your own transmissions, particularly if you're aiming at any sort of audio quality, because you have to know whether your level is clipping or it's too low, or what people are hearing at the other end. It's hard to tell unless you actually have a receiver running while you're transmitting. Any other questions at all? Nice to see 7 people looking in. Radio Australia. Any YLs out there got a copy? Mate, I am 67 years old. Do you think YLs would be looking in on me? I'm sure they have much better meat to look for than this old codger. Any YLs? If you're looking for YLs on radio, I think you're barking up the wrong tree. Try some of the internet chat systems like PalTalk, or if you really want to waggle your dick about in public, I suppose something like Omegle or Chatterbait might be the go. But oh God, you know. Even if I'd been of an age, I wouldn't have been interested, believe me. There are much better ways of meeting women. In the old days, joining a hiking club was a great way of doing it. So I suggest Radio Australia that if that's your game, perhaps there might be some more productive ways. This is head food, not down there. So, you know, if you're looking for that particular thing, there are ways and means. Not that I ever am terribly interested. Okay, I won't hang around too long tonight, fellas. I just basically wanted to test the equipment and see if it was all still working after 2 weeks of not being switched on. In the background, that cuckoo sound you can hear is that radio scanning and then lobbing onto carriers. I'll just turn it up, see if anybody's on, but it looks like 70 centimeters. Oh. Oh, that's UHF-CB. I can receive on that radio on UHF-CB, but I can't transmit there. I wouldn't want to. That last transmission with the F word thrown, the set repeater on 476.5 megs. If you want to brush up on your epithet vocabulary of 4-letter words, it's a great way of learning a lot of new ones and hearing the old ones over and over again. Okay, any other Radio Shack? That's some of the gear over here. It's the shortwave receiver, VHF converter above there, antenna tuning there, power supply there, and transmitter for 2 meters and 70 centimeters there. This is an audio interface that leads from my audio mixer operating off this microphone and leads into that transmitter. So this is the interface box that basically interfaces my audio into that transmitter. And unfortunately, Dennis, you've come in just as we're starting to wrap up the test. So has anybody got any other questions about ham radio, radio in general, media? I worked in radio for quite a few decades, so if you have any interest. I read that as of 2009, VicPol used APCO digital voice on UHF. The encryption is 128-bit rolling code, whatever that means. Well, it basically means that even if you got the code to decipher their transmissions, it wouldn't be the same an hour from now. And while their digital voice transmissions in the metro area, I think the police converted in the bush to APCO some years after 2009. I know that was a gradual changeover, not a sudden changeover, and there may be some parts of the bush where police or fire services are still using analog. Okay, that's a cool feature to have. Is it your stream with a speed issue or ADSL? Must be a stream issue. My wife is watching cable TV in the other room off the same cable that the internet works on. That might be slowing me down. But I see that there's a fluidity of motion issue that I'm getting here, indicating that my frame rate is down to about 12 frames a second or something like that. Sometimes it's susceptible of increasing the light levels, but I don't think that's going to happen tonight. No. Okay, fellas. Well, look, just if you could note down in your diaries or whatever, or in your, Palm Pilot or whatever you're using with a battery, that we'll be transmitting a broadcast related to radio history, documentary material, which will also be transmitted on 147.475 megahertz from 9:30 p.m. next Saturday. What has struck me is how much community radio has taken off. Gosh, Dennis, you're starting a subject there. I was involved with the start of one of the first community radio stations in Australia, 3CR, Community Radio Melbourne, which was originally started by a consortium of many community groups who came together, I think, in 1973 or 4 to bid for station licenses being granted at that time by the Whitlam Labor government, and specifically at the insistence of Whitlam's media minister, Dr. Moss Cass. And they issued a number of licenses at that stage, including 3MBS FM for Brian Cabina, the Fine Music FM station in Kew, which was the first FM broadcast station in the current spate of FM broadcasting. Went to air in 1974, and 3CR, the community radio station, originally went to air from studios at 1112 High Street, Armidale, southeastern suburb of Melbourne, inner city suburb. In May 1976, they had test transmissions from May the 4th. I was in on that. And they went to air officially on July the 3rd, 1976. And I was there that day. Met my first girlfriend that day, actually, at the studios. And since then, community radio, there are community stations, about one for every 3 suburbs in Melbourne. Some of them with very few listeners and very limited coverage, others with very large coverage. 3CR had an AM license with a directional antenna and a fairly high-powered transmitter at Hoppers Crossing now. Grown quite a bit since the Armidale days, and you can hear that transmitter, as I found out listening in bed at night in Hobart. You can hear it in Hobart. Can't hear it very well in Geelong. It's directional, but you can hear it also at Albury. 3MBS got the same deal. Have blah, 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 blah. Have I ever picked up a Jumva? The only Jumva I know is one of these. Or are you talking about something else? Number station, never been into them. I know that they exist and that there's some sort of coding, and I have heard them, but not so much in recent times. Community radio, there's the Community Radio Federation now, which is the consortium of community groups right across Australia, have formed quite a significant media lobby. And frankly, with the boring nature of some commercial stations, I can understand why people would go for grassroots stuff, rough though it may be, produced by community radio. Dennis Moscas, Jim Cairns, Junior Morosi, Weird Times. What's that, hon? Okay, I will have to go, people. So I'll wish you all the best. My wife has asked me to help wash the dishes. It's now 10:37. I suppose I should have done it hours ago, but I decided to give this a test. Anyway, I hope to see you or hear from you next Saturday night. That's in 6 days' time, 9:30 p.m. Melbourne time. I'll be doing the usual transmission on 2 meters and on this. So it may be of some interest. All the best to you. Thanks very much for tuning in. This is the first time we've tested for quite a while. 5AN ABC Adelaide. Okay. And you're in Canberra. Okay. Well, when I get the 80-meter transmission up from here in Melbourne, you should receive that in Canberra extremely well on 3670 kilohertz. If you haven't got a shortwave receiver, you can dial up software-defined radio on internet, websdr.org, or just dial in Kiwi SDR, KIWI SDR, and you should get a list of web-based software-defined radios that you can tune in 3670 kilohertz and probably hear us. Okay, all the best. Thank you so much for attending. This is only an unscheduled test, and I'm surprised to see the number of people here. Have a good one.